Jason Murphy froze when he saw a metallic gleam among the charred branches, a ritual dagger with ancient engravings, too similar to the one they'd found in the ashes of his house 5 years ago. A chill ran down the ranger's spine. That January night in 2010 had changed his life forever. As an arson investigator in Seattle, he got too close to something dangerous. During an emergency call from his partner, his house burned to the ground along with his wife and 6-year-old daughter. After the funeral, Jason turned in his badge and disappeared from the city. North Cascades National Park, with its glacial peaks and deep forests, was the perfect refuge from the world. The locals called the area the American Alps, a rugged region with more than 300 glaciers and dangerous passes where a mistake could cost a life. Here, Jason found what he was looking for, a constant battle with nature, leaving no time for memories. For 2 years, he mechanically performed the duties of a ranger, preferring the most difficult routes and isolated posts. Only Roy Hayes, the 60-year-old chief ranger of the northern sector, had managed to find an approach to the silent newcomer. The old man, who had given 30 years of his life to the park, saw Jason as more than just another fugitive from civilization. He didn't ask about the past, but he was generous with his survival experience and his strange stories about the secrets of the mountains. January 2013 was abnormally snowy. Over breakfast, Roy reported strange lights near an abandoned logging camp at Ladder Creek Falls. "Just look around and come straight back. Don't linger there," the mentor pronounced, avoiding a direct look. Something in his voice alerted Jason. Roy seemed to know more than he was saying. Checking his gear before he left, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that today was going to be a life-changing day. It was as if the rugged mountains of the North Cascades, which had kept him from the past for 5 years, had now decided to bring him face to face with something he'd been trying to escape for so long. The silence in the snow-covered forest seemed unnatural. Usually there were always sounds in these places: the rustle of wind in the branches, the crackle of ice on the lakes, the occasional cries of birds. But now, approaching the abandoned camp at Ladder Creek Falls, Jason heard only the crunch of his own footsteps in the snow. It was as if nature was holding its breath. The journey from the ranger station took nearly 4 hours. Jason took the eastern route, choosing trails where the snow wasn't as deep. The GPS indicated that the old logging camp was half a kilometer north of the falls, on a small plateau surrounded by century-old pines. Roy marked 4 wooden buildings on the map: an administration building, a warehouse, and 2 residential cabins, abandoned in the early 1990s when the area had been incorporated into the park. The first thing Jason noticed as he approached the camp was the strange absence of snow on the roof of the nearest hut. It looked unnatural in January after a week of snowfall. As he drew closer, he realized the reason. The base of the wooden structure was warm to the touch despite the sub-zero temperatures. Someone had recently built a fire inside powerful enough to warm the foundation. The ranger unholstered his service pistol and cautiously approached the door. The inside of the hut smelled of cinders and something else, herbs and tar. The lantern beam revealed a long, cold hearth, a roughly made table, and 2 wooden chairs. There were footprints on the floor, partially covered with dust, the prints of several pairs of boots, leading from the door to the other end of the room. Jason noticed fresh firewood in the corner, neatly stacked as if ready for use. On the table were strange symbols carved in wood, zigzag lines that looked like flames. The metal handle in the far corner of the room was almost hidden beneath the floorboards. Jason pulled on it and found a narrow trap door that led to the basement. He descended the wooden stairs and found himself in a large, low-ceilinged room. The cellar was much larger than the size of the hut would suggest, and clearly connected to the other buildings of the camp. The center of the cellar was a stone circle with symbols burned around it, the same symbols Jason had seen on the table upstairs. The lantern's beam caught the wall images in the darkness: flames, burning trees, and among them, human figures with their arms outstretched. He had seen something similar in the investigation that had led to his family's death. Charred branches lay beside the stone circle, gathered in a sun-like pattern. Jason found a niche in the far corner of the cellar, closed by a roughly constructed door. Inside were personal belongings, a backpack, a camera, and a video camera that clearly didn't belong to the forest hermits. The camera still had a recording on it dated last week. With shaky hands, the ranger switched on the playback. The image was dark, but voices could clearly be heard, male and female, discussing the strange symbols they had found in the forest. Then the camera turned, and the frame showed figures in black robes standing in a circle around a campfire. The recording cut off with a scream. Jason methodically gathered up all the items he had found: camera, video camera, small items from his backpack that might help identify the missing hikers. He was about to leave the basement when he noticed a metallic glint among the charred branches. Bending down, the ranger picked up a ritual dagger so similar to the one they'd found 5 years ago in the ashes of his house. When he got out of the basement, Jason surveyed the rest of the camp, but found nothing of note, just abandoned rooms with rotting furniture and forest animal tracks. As he left the camp, he felt strangely relieved, as if he'd escaped from a nightmare. On the way back, Jason deliberately changed his route, taking a longer but safer path. Something told him that the direct route might be a trap. The winter twilight was fading, and the ranger switched on his headlamp so he wouldn't lose the trail. As he approached the ranger station, Jason heard the crunch of branches behind him. He turned sharply, drawing his gun, but in the darkness, he could only make out a receding figure. The light of the torch caught the silhouette of the old man for a moment. Broad shoulders, a distinctive gait. Roy? What was he doing in the woods at this hour? And why had he fled without calling out to Jason? The questions swarmed through the ranger's mind as he clutched the evidence bag tighter as he headed toward the station light, visible through the trees. The following days turned into a nightmare of bureaucracy and dead-end trails for Jason. Evidence collected at the camp was turned over to federal agents, but the case was soon taken to the FBI's Special Victims Unit because of possible connections to other investigations. The missing campers' belongings were identified as belonging to a married couple from Oregon, whose footprints broke off at the park entrance. When Jason tried to continue his own investigation, he was abruptly transferred to the southern sector of the park due to personnel changes. 2 weeks later, a record-breaking avalanche hit, completely filling the Ladder Creek Falls area, making it inaccessible for the rest of the year. Jason was left to scavenge for information and wait for the next opportunity to continue his search. The flames devoured the old photograph, turning the faces of the smiling hikers into black ash. Jason stared at the burning photograph, thinking about the people who had disappeared in the North Cascades Mountains over the past year. The 3 new disappeared. Photography students from Portland were marked with red dots on a map hanging in the Ranger Service office. February 2014 was surprisingly dry. Jason returned to the north sector of the park after a year in the south and immediately received a report of missing students. Their car was found in a car park near Colonial Creek, and in one of them's backpack they found a map with a route to a familiar place, Ladder Creek Falls, where a ranger had encountered evidence of a mysterious cult a year earlier. "I knew them back in the 80s, Roy Hayes admitted as Jason cornered him in the station office. The old man had aged considerably, his hair completely gray, and his hands trembling as he laid out a map with historical markings. The fire purification sect had been here long before the national park was established. Back then, they called themselves Keepers of the Flame and held small, controlled bonfires. Roy, a young ranger, didn't report them to management for fear of scandal. I should have reported, his gaze avoided Jason's, but then it would have meant trouble for the park. Going through old fire reports, Jason found 3 incidents with similar handwriting, including a fire in a Seattle suburb in 2010, the same one that killed his family. Roy pulled from the safe a tattered notebook of observations he'd kept since 1985. "They believe fire cleanses the earth of human presence," the old man explained. "What you found last year is just one of their hideouts." From his notes, Jason identified a possible location for the cultists, an abandoned observation station near the Colonial Creek watershed. The station appeared to be inhabited. Lights were on in the wooden structure, and figures in dark robes were moving about inside. An SUV matching the description of the missing student's car was parked at the entrance. As Jason left the observation point, he noticed the metal pins the sectarians had placed in a geometric pattern in the large area around the station. In a hiding place under a fallen tree, the ranger found a cultist's cache of documents and maps. One marked the entire North Cascades Park with dozens of red dots. In a notebook signed Keeper of the Flame, he found notes about the Great Purification. 12 dots marked and consecrated. The ritual of Phase 1 is complete in Goodell, but a more powerful flame is required. Phase 2 requires new souls to open the gates. The notes were accompanied by hidden camera photos of the 3 students. Jason realized the cult was planning a series of synchronized arson attacks throughout the area. Walking back to the car, Jason hid when he heard the noise of an engine. A black SUV pulled up to the station, out of which stepped 3 men in dark clothing and Gerald Thorne, deputy director of the Park Service, the same one who'd initiated Jason's transfer to the southern sector a year ago and insisted on turning over the evidence to the feds. Now he was shaking hands with the cultists as if they were old acquaintances. In the city, Jason contacted a former colleague. David Harris, having studied the materials, confirmed. The MO matches a series of ritual arsons in recent years. Synchronized fires in dozens of locations during the dry season will create a firestorm that is unstoppable, he concluded. They made a plan. David would activate contacts at the FBI, and Jason would continue to monitor the station. In 3 days, a period of high fire danger was to begin. The perfect time for the Great Purge. As he prepared to return to the station, Jason received a disturbing call from Roy. The old man spoke confusedly, punctuated by coughs. "They know about our meetings. Thorne suspects you. I left something for you in the stash at Diablo's." The connection went dead, and Roy didn't answer the phone again. The next morning, Jason found his house broken into. Documents turned over, computer destroyed. The ranger had barely made it to his car when he saw 2 strangers heading towards his house. Driving out of town, he tried to contact David, but he didn't answer. Jason later learned that an internal affairs investigation had been launched against him on charges of tampering with evidence and harassing park management. Thorne acted quickly and decisively. In a desperate attempt to find evidence, Jason traveled to a hiding place near Diablo Lake. In an old hollow tree, he found a waterproof container of documents. Roy gathered materials on the sect's activities over 30 years and a map with the coordinates of their ritual sites. In his last note, the old man confessed that he feared for his life. In recent days, he had noticed surveillance. Jason decided to send these materials to David by courier, but he was stopped by a sheriff's patrol on his way into town. A warrant had been issued for his arrest on a trumped-up charge of stealing evidence from the Park Service vault. The next 10 months became a legal nightmare. Thorne used his position to block any attempt by Jason to prove the cult's existence. Spring floods destroyed some of the physical evidence on the ground. Jason's testimony about the station didn't hold up. An official inspection there had found no trace of the cultists or Roy's body. Worst of all, David's colleague at the FBI was abruptly transferred, and his successor deemed the case devoid of evidence. The search for Roy himself yielded no results. The old man seemed to have vanished into the mountains. It was only in January 2015, after a long legal struggle and the intervention of influential journalists interested in the series of disappearances in the park, that all charges against Jason were dropped. He returned to duty, now knowing that he was fighting not just a cult, but a corrupt system. Time was working against him. According to Roy's notes, the Great Purification was to take place in the summer of 2015, when a certain astronomical phenomenon would create the perfect conditions for the ritual. Jason realized that this was his last chance to stop the cult and the man who had destroyed his family. The first flames were already rising to the sky when Jason Murphy reached the observation deck. The north peak overlooked the valley, with smoke rising from 3 different points. July 2015 was abnormally hot, even for the North Cascades. A record drought had turned the forest into the perfect fuel. Emergency reports of new fires throughout the park were relayed via walkie-talkie. It was beginning to be exactly what the ranger had been dreading. Everything had changed a fortnight ago. Jason was checking the hiking trails when he noticed the stacked rocks, an old sign he and Roy had exchanged during joint patrols. Beneath them lay a tattered waterproof map with a single inscription, Ross Lake, North Shore, midnight. The meeting at the lake had turned the tide. Roy Hayes was alive. "I was buried alive," the old man said hoarsely, showing the deep scars on his arms. "Got out when they left. Dead. I could gather evidence more efficiently." In the hunting cabin where Roy was hiding, Jason saw the results of his work. Maps with the marked points of planned arson attacks and the date, the 23rd of July. Back at Park Service headquarters, Jason faced an impenetrable wall of distrust. The new director, appointed with Thorne's support, refused to evacuate the park based on unconfirmed suspicions. Only David Harris of the FBI took the warning seriously, but official authorization for the operation was not expected until the next day. Too late. On the morning of the 23rd of July, Jason made a risky decision. Using old acquaintances, he launched an evacuation protocol under the pretext of seismic activity in the Mount Baker area. By noon, when the first flames appeared, most of the hikers had already left the danger zones. The fire was spreading at an incredible rate. According to Roy, security had managed to neutralize 3 of the 12 planned points before they were activated, but even 9 were enough to create a massive threat. "Diablo Falls," Roy reported over the radio. "Everything's shorting out there. If we don't stop the main ritual, they'll activate the backup points." Jason took the rover and headed for the falls, skirting the already burning patches of forest. At Diablo Falls, the ranger found metal structures forming a ritual circle with a platform and a fire bowl in the center. Hiding behind the trees, he spotted figures in long robes. A tall man in a cloak, the cult leader Jason had seen a year ago, stood next to Gerald Thorne, now dressed in the same ceremonial robes. "Fire is spreading according to plan," Thorne reported. 9 points activated. That's enough for Phase 1. "You have fulfilled your role, Brother Gerald," the leader's voice sounded unnaturally calm. "Now, you must be part of the final ritual." Thorne stepped back, feeling threatened. "That's not what we agreed," panic sounded in his voice. "I provided cover, eliminated witnesses." The leader drew his ritual dagger. "The Great Purification demands the final sacrifice, the one who stands between the two worlds." At his sign, the cultists grabbed Thorne, and in one motion, the leader slit his throat. A fire on a nearby slope diverted the cultists' attention. Jason reported the exact coordinates of the ritual site and retreated, observing security protocol. 20 minutes later, the area was surrounded by a special FBI team and police officers from several counties. The operation was quick and uncomplicated. The cultists, realizing the hopelessness of the situation, offered no serious resistance. The cult leader and 5 of his followers were detained right at the ritual platform. During interrogations, the location of all the remaining arson devices was identified. Over the next 3 days, fire services from 5 counties fought the blazes. The Great Clearing became one of the largest wildfires in North Cascades history, but due to coordinated action and timely evacuations, loss of life was avoided. An official FBI investigation linked the blazes to the activities of an extremist group, revealing the entire chain of individuals involved, including Gerald Thorne. When the extinguishing operations were completed, Jason returned to duty. The FBI's physical evidence archive included the very same ritual dagger found at the ritual site, an exact replica of the one the ranger had discovered 2 years earlier. The final page in a long investigation was closed. Roy Hayes' name was rarely mentioned in official reports. The former ranger had chosen to remain anonymous and had gone to another state under the Witness Protection Program after testifying. But sometimes Jason would find rocks set up in remote corners of the park, a quiet reminder that the old ranger still remembered the mountains to which he'd given most of his life. North Cascades held its secrets, recovering from the fire and returning to its ancient, majestic beauty. August 2018 has been surprisingly mild for the North Cascades. Jason Murphy walks slowly along the trail leading to Diablo Falls, noting how nature had almost completely healed the scars of the Great Purge in 3 years. Young trees were breaking through the once charred ground, shrubs covered the ashes, and forest animals had returned to their former domain. Last week, a court handed down the latest sentence to members of the fire cleansing cult. The cult's leader received a life sentence without parole. David Harris, now the head of the division at the FBI, sent official notification that the case was over. The point had been made. After completing his investigation, Jason accepted the position of Chief Ranger for the Northern Sector, a position once held by Roy Hayes. Working here, among the ancient mountains and centuries-old forests, brought him a long-awaited peace. The memory of his family had always stayed with him, but the sharp pain had given way to quiet sadness and acceptance. Near the waterfall now stood a modest plaque, a memorial to those who fought the 2015 fire. Officially, the old ranger had been presumed dead long before the Great Purge had begun. Jason walked to the edge of the observation deck and carefully placed 2 stones one on top of the other, a simple sign known only to the 2 of them. As he turned to leave, he noticed the same design a few meters away, clearly left recently. Smiling, the ranger didn't bother looking for the person who had put it together. Roy Hayes was long dead in the records, but to the North Cascades and to Jason, he was just another living legend of this harsh and beautiful place. A man who, like Jason himself, understood all too well that sometimes true healing came only when you were away from people, among the silent centuries-old trees. Friends, you've just heard the story of the North Cascades mysteries and the fire purification cult. But did it really end in 2015? Does Roy Hayes really exist, or is it just a legend created to appease the public? And why do dozens of people disappear without a trace in national parks every year? If you like this story as much as I do, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Many more mysterious stories from the wildest corners of America's wilderness areas to come. Share your theories in the comments.